She was fired in front of everyone until the millionaire appeared and said, "She is my wife." She just wanted to keep her dignity intact. But at that moment, in front of all her colleagues, Alessandra felt that even that had been taken away from her. The meeting room of the marketing company in Madrid was full. 25 employees waited nervously while the director, Mr. Martinez, looked over some papers with a serious expression. The air conditioning hummed constantly, but the atmosphere was still tense. Alessandra adjusted her modest blouse and took a deep breath. At 34, she had been working at the company for 6 years, always punctual, always polite, always giving her best. As you all know, the company is going through a difficult time, Martinez began without looking up from his papers. We need to make some cuts. Alessandra's heart raced. She looked around and saw the same concern on her colleagues' faces. Some were nervously fiddling with their cell phones, others were pretending to take notes. Unfortunately, some people will have to be let go, the director continued. The first is Alessandra Herrera. The world stopped for a second. Alessandra felt the blood rush to her face and then quickly drain away, leaving her pale. All eyes turned to her, some with pity, others with relief at not having been named. Me, she asked in a lower voice than she intended. Yes, your numbers are not satisfactory. You can pick up your things today, Martinez said, still not looking directly at her arm. Alessandra knew that wasn't true. Her projects were always delivered on time. Her clients appreciated her work. But there, in front of everyone, there was no way to argue without looking desperate. I understand, she replied, slowly getting up. She walked over to her small desk by the window, from where she could see the bustling Serrano Street. Her hands trembled as she packed her few personal belongings into a cardboard box, a mug with a photo of her niece, a small cactus she had been caring for 3 years, a worn-out diary. Her colleagues avoided looking at her directly, but they whispered among themselves. Alessandra pretended not to notice. For 6 years, she had arrived every day at 8 a.m. She would eat a quick lunch at the corner cafe to save money and only return home when she had finished her tasks. Now, carrying the box, she passed the reception desk, where the young secretary gave her a sad smile and a small wave goodbye. The intense September sun hit her face as she left the building. Madrid was as bustling as ever, with tourists walking in groups and hurried executives talking on the phone. Alessandra stopped in her tracks, still trying to process what had happened. She didn't have much money saved. The rent for her small apartment in the Chambéry neighborhood consumed a large part of her salary. How was she going to explain to her mother, who lived in a small town near Valladolid, that she had lost her job? She decided to walk instead of taking the subway. She needed time to think. She passed through Plaza de Colón, where some people were resting on benches enjoying the sun. Children played while their mothers chatted. Life went on as normal for everyone except her. When she got home, a call was waiting for her. It was her sister, Elena, who lived in Barcelona. "Alexandra, how was work today?" Elena asked in her usual cheerful voice. "I got fired," Alessandra replied bluntly, unable to come up with an excuse. "What? What do you mean you got fired?" "Why, they said my numbers weren't good, but I know that's not true." Elena was silent for a few seconds. "Listen, you've always been the more responsible one of the two of us. If they fired you, they lost an excellent employee. You'll find something better." At 34, Elena, in Madrid, everyone wants young, cheap people. Don't say that. You have experience. You're dedicated. Alessandra sat down on the small sofa in the living room, still holding the box with her belongings. "I don't know what I'm going to do now." The two talked for a few more minutes, but her sister's words of encouragement seemed distant. When she hung up, Alessandra looked out the window. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and from there she could see life passing by on the street. People returning from work, some carrying shopping bags, others walking hurriedly. She opened her old laptop and began searching for job offers online. But after 2 hours, the reality was discouraging. Most of them had requirements she didn't meet or offered very low salaries. That night, lying in bed, Alessandra thought about how life can change in an instant. In the morning, she had a routine, her own desk, colleagues who greeted her. Now she didn't even know how she would pay next month's bills. What she didn't imagine was that the next day a phone call would change everything again, and this time in a direction she could never have predicted. The call came at 9 a.m., as Alessandra was drinking her coffee alone in the small kitchen, still in her pajamas. "Hello, this is Alessandra," said an unfamiliar male voice. "Yes? Who is this?" "My name is Ricardo Santos. I'm a lawyer. I need to speak with you urgently about a personal matter." Alessandra frowned. A lawyer. She had no pending legal issues. "What is this about?" "I'd rather explain in person. Can you come to my office today? It's on Main Street near the Plaza Mayor." "Well, I'm unemployed at the moment. I don't know if I can afford your fees." "Don't worry about that. In fact, the matter may be of interest to you. Let's say 2 p.m. Alessandra hesitated, but curiosity won out. Besides, she had nothing better to do. "All right, what's the exact address?" At 2 o'clock sharp, she was standing in front of an elegant building in the historic center of Madrid. The office was on the 5th floor, and the reception area was decorated with dark wood furniture and classic paintings. Ricardo Santos was a man in his 50s with gray hair, small glasses, and an impeccable suit. He greeted her with a polite smile and led her to a meeting room. "Alexandra, what I'm about to tell you may surprise you," he began, sitting down across from her. "Have you heard of Antonio Mendoza?" The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't remember where from. "I think so, but I don't remember. He owns several businesses here in Madrid, restaurants, real estate, some stores. A very successful man. And what does that have to do with me?" Ricardo opened a folder and took out some papers. "Antonio Mendoza has been looking for you for over 10 years, Alessandra." She felt a chill. "Looking for me. Why? Because you were married." The world seemed to spin. Alessandra clung to the edges of the chair. "That's impossible. I've never been married. Officially, you still are." Ricardo showed her a marriage certificate dated 15 years ago. Her name was there with a signature she recognized as hers even after all this time. "This can't be real," she murmured, taking the paper with trembling hands. "Remember Barcelona 2010? You were 19. Suddenly, the memories came flooding back. She was in Barcelona on summer vacation with a friend. She met a guy at a beach party. Antonio was funny, charming, a few years older. They spent a whole week together walking around the Sagrada Familia, eating tapas in small bars, talking late into the night. On the last night, he proposed something that seemed like a romantic game. "Let's get symbolically married," and he said with a laugh, "just to mark this special moment." They went to a notary's office that was still open with 2 people from the street as witnesses. She thought it was just a romantic gesture with no legal value. She signed the papers with a laugh, believing it was a fun souvenir of that magical week. The next day, she returned home. She tried to keep in touch with Antonio, but he stopped responding to her messages. Little by little, she understood that it had only been a summer fling for him. She filed that memory away as a youthful mistake and moved on. "I thought it had no legal validity," she told Ricardo. "Yes, it did. They've been married for 15 years. But why is he looking for me now?" Ricardo hesitated for a moment. "Antonio needs to get married again. To do that, he must first divorce you." Alessandra leaned back in her chair, still processing everything. "And he can't find me on his own. He tried for years. You changed your address several times. You don't have active social media accounts. It was difficult to locate you. So he just wants a divorce." Actually, Ricardo seemed uncomfortable. "He asked you to invite her to talk to him personally before anything else." "Talk about what?" "He'd rather explain that himself." Alessandra looked out the office window. Below, the main square was full of tourists taking pictures. Her life, which had already been turned upside down since yesterday, had just become even more complicated. "Where does he want to meet me?" "Tonight at 8 p.m. at the Casa Lucio restaurant." Did she know it? Of course she knew it. It was one of the most famous and expensive restaurants in Madrid. She had never been there, but she knew. She knew of its reputation. Would he be there? Yes. A table reserved under the name Mendoza. Alessandra took a deep breath. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her job and discovered that she had been married to a stranger for 15 years. What other surprises would life have in store for her? "I'll go," she finally said. When she left the office, she wandered aimlessly through the streets of downtown. "Tell me what city and country you are watching this video from. I will read all the comments." Questions kept popping into her mind. How did Antonio get rich? Why didn't he find her sooner? And above all, what did he want to talk about that couldn't be resolved simply with divorce papers? At 7:30 p.m., she was in front of Lucio's house wearing her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. Her hands were sweating and her heart was pounding. In a few minutes, she would see the man who, unbeknownst to her, had been her husband all these years. What would Antonio say when he saw her? And above all, would she still recognize him as the young man she fell in love with during a week in Barcelona that summer? Antonio Mendoza was more elegant than Alessandra remembered, but his eyes were still the same. At 40, he had a more serious demeanor, well-cut hair with a few gray strands at the temples, and he wore a dark suit that looked tailor-made. When she entered the restaurant, he immediately got up from the table. "Alexandra," he said with a smile that mixed nervousness and genuine joy. Antonio greeted her with a formal handshake, but she noticed that he held her hand a few seconds longer than normal between strangers. The restaurant was full with the typical bustle of Madrid dinners. Waiters circulated among the tables carrying plates that gave off delicious aromas. Their table was in a more secluded corner, away from the main activity. "You look beautiful," Antonio said as they sat down. "Thank you. You look good too." An awkward silence settled between them. 15 years is a long time, and they both seemed to be sizing each other up, looking for traces of the past in the present. "Alexandra, I know all this must be very confusing for you," Antonio began. "Confusing is an understatement. Yesterday I lost my job. Today I found out I've been married for 15 years. You lost your job?" She briefly recounted what had happened at the company. Antonio listened attentively, frowning when she mentioned the public humiliation. What company was it? When she said the name, Antonio made a mental note of it. "But anyway," Alessandra continued, "your lawyer said you wanted to talk before the divorce. About what?" Antonio took a deep breath as if preparing for something difficult. "Alessandra, first I need to tell you the truth about that summer in Barcelona." "What truth? I didn't stop responding to your messages because I lost interest. I did it because I thought you deserved someone better." She looked at him without understanding. "What do you mean, better?" "At that time, I had nothing. I worked as a waiter. I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 other guys. When I met you, I lied about a lot of things. I said I was studying business at a good university, that my father had a business. You lied completely. My father was a doorman in a building. I wasn't even studying. I was saving money to maybe start a career." Alessandra processed the information. The waiter approached and Antonio ordered a bottle of red wine, giving them a few extra minutes for that conversation. "So you just disappeared because you didn't have any money, because I thought you would find out who I really was and be disappointed. You talked about your university, your plans, how you wanted to work for a big company in Madrid. I was just a waiter in love who did something crazy." "How crazy?" Antonio smiled with a melancholy expression. "Marrying you at that moment, at the notary's office, I really wanted it to be true. I wanted to be the man you deserved." The wine arrived and Antonio poured 2 glasses. Alessandra took a sip, feeling the warm liquid go down her throat. "And what changed? How did you become successful?" "I worked like crazy, waiter by day, security guard at a nightclub by night. I saved money and opened a small bar in Barcelona. Then another. I got a loan and opened a restaurant. Things grew, and you never really got married." Antonio looked down. "I tried a few times, but there was always a problem. I was already married. You could have come to me for a divorce years ago. I could have, but I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to undo that. It was the only real thing left from that week." Alessandra felt a mixture of anger and tenderness. Anger because he disappeared without explanation. Tenderness upon discovering that her feelings at the time had been reciprocated. "And now, why did you come looking for me now?" Antonio looked her straight in the eye. "Because I met someone who wants to marry me. And before doing so, I needed to find you and apologize. That's all," and because he paused as if struggling with himself. "Because in all these years, I could never completely forget you." Dinner was served, but neither of them paid much attention to the food. They talked about their lives, the paths they had taken, the people they had become. Antonio talked about his business, how he learned everything on the job. The sleepless nights in the early years. Alessandra talked about her life in Madrid, how she had always been independent, how she had never married because she had never found anyone who made her feel the way she felt that week in Barcelona. "You know," she said as dinner was ending, "for years I wondered if it had all been real or if I had imagined the connection I felt." "It was real," Antonio replied. At least for me, it was the most real thing I had ever experienced. When they left the restaurant, it was almost midnight. The streets in the city center were quieter, but there were still people coming out of bars and other restaurants. Alexandra, Antonio said when they stopped at the curb, I know this may sound crazy, but would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow too? Not to talk about divorce or the past, just to get to know each other again. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his expression that reminded her of the young man in Barcelona, but now with the maturity and confidence that the years had given him. Antonio, aren't you engaged? I was. I ended it this morning. Why buying? Because I realized I was trying to marry her for the wrong reasons and because it wouldn't be fair to her to start a marriage thinking about someone else. Alessandra's heart raced. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but there was something irresistible about the idea of discovering who this new Antonio was. Okay, she finally said, but tomorrow I choose the place. When she got home that night, her head was spinning. In 2 days, her life had taken a complete turn, but unlike the dismissal that brought despair, this reunion brought something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. What she didn't know was that the next morning, an unexpected situation would reveal a side of Antonio that would change everything again. The next morning, Alessandra woke up to a call from Elena. What do you mean you've been married for 50 years? Her sister shouted from the other end of the line. Alessandra told her the whole story, from the lawyer's call to the dinner at Casaluccio. And you're going out with him again, Alessandra? Have you lost your mind? Elena is not the same guy from Barcelona. He has changed, he has grown up, and you have changed too. You are two completely different people now. After calming her sister down, Alessandra decided to stop by the company to pick up some documents she had forgotten. It was almost 11 a.m. when she arrived at the building on Serrano Street. At the reception desk, she found a commotion. Several employees were gathered in groups, whispering and looking agitated. The secretary saw her and ran toward her. Alessandra, I'm so glad you came. What's going on? A man arrived a little while ago asking for you. When he found out you had been fired yesterday, he asked to speak to Mr. Martinez. What man? He said he was your husband. Alessandra's heart raced. Antonio was there. Where are they? In the director's office. They've been talking for an hour. Alessandra quickly went up to the management floor. As she approached Martinez's office, she could hear raised voices through the door. This is none of your business, Martinez's voice said. Of course it's my business. We're talking about my wife, Antonio replied in a firm tone she had never heard before. Your wife. She never mentioned she was married because she's discreet, unlike you who fires employees in front of everyone to feed your ego. Alessandra leaned against the hallway wall, trying to process what she was hearing. Look, Mr. Mendoza, Antonio Mendoza. There was silence on the other end. The Antonio Mendoza of Mendoza Enterprises. Exactly, another silence. Longer this time. I didn't know Alessandra was your wife, Mr. Mendoza. Now you know, and I want to understand why you unfairly fired an exemplary employee. Well, if we think about it, maybe we were too hasty. You were, and now you're going to correct it. The door opened abruptly, and Antonio came out, almost bumping into Alessandra. Alessandra, what are you doing here? I came to get some documents. Antonio, what are you doing? Before he could answer, Martinez appeared at the door with a red face and an embarrassed expression. Alessandra, it's good to see you. We were just talking about a misunderstanding that happened yesterday. Misunderstanding? She repeated. Confused? Yes, there was a mistake in the calculations. In reality, you are one of our best employees. We would like you to come back, even with a raise. Alessandra looked from Martinez to Antonio, trying to understand the situation. Did you do this? Antonio asked. I just came to talk, he replied with an innocent smile. Martinez hurried to continue. Of course, if you prefer, we can discuss generous compensation. That's not necessary, Alessandra interrupted. I don't want to come back, Alessandra, Martinez began. Thanks, but no. Yesterday you made it clear what you think of me. Today you only changed your mind because you found out who my husband is. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Antonio followed her. Alessandra, wait. When the elevator doors closed, she confronted him. Antonio, you can't do this. Do what? Use your money to solve my problems. I didn't ask for your help, I know. but I couldn't stand by and do nothing knowing that they humiliated you. And how did you know where I worked? You told me yesterday at dinner. They reached the ground floor in silence. Outside the building, Antonio stopped. Alessandra, I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I didn't mean to. Antonio, we barely know each other. You can't go around introducing yourself as my husband. But I am officially your husband. Technically, but not really. He looked at her with a serious expression. What if I wanted it to be real? The question hung in the air between them. Alessandra felt the world spinning again. Antonio, I know it sounds crazy. I know we haven't been in touch for 15 years. I know we're different people now. But last night, talking to you, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. What? That I found my home? Alessandra felt her eyes fill with tears. They were nice words, but life wasn't a fairy tale. Antonio, you have a company to run, responsibilities. I'm unemployed, aimless. What if I told you I have a job offer for you? No, not like that. It's not charity, Alessandra. I need someone competent to manage a new project. You have experience in marketing. Do you know the Madrid market? Working for my husband, working with me. They walked slowly down Serrano Street. The sun was strong, but a gentle breeze made for a pleasant afternoon. I need to think, she finally said. Sure, but our table is reserved for tonight. Are you still coming? Alessandra looked at him. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also a vulnerability she didn't expect to find in a successful man. I'll go, but only to talk like two adults about this whole situation. Okay. When they said goodbye, Alessandra stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, watching Antonio walk away. He was different from the guy in Barcelona, but there was something familiar about the way he walked, about the smile he gave her as he turned to say goodbye one last time. That night in the small restaurant she chose in the Malasaña neighborhood, far from the glamour of Casa Lucio, they talked for hours about dreams they had, mistakes they made, about how life sometimes takes us down paths we never imagined. Alessandra, Antonio said when it was late, I can't promise that giving our marriage a second chance will be easy, but I can promise that this time I won't disappear. And I can't promise that I'll accept, but I can promise that I'll think about it with an open heart. 2 weeks later, Alessandra was sitting on the balcony of the new apartment that Antonio had insisted on renting for her, not as a husband, but as a friend who could help when she received a call from Elena. So how are things with your husband, not husband? Strange, good, scary. Will you accept his job offer? Yes, but with a very clear professional contract. And the personal proposal? Alessandra smiled as she looked at the street where Antonio had just parked. He had a habit of picking her up for work and always brought her a latte from the bakery she liked. The personal proposal, I'm taking it one day at a time. When Antonio came up to get her, she was ready with a work folder in one hand and a smile on her face. Good morning, husband, she said, playing with the word. Good morning, wife, he replied, smiling back. They went downstairs together, and before getting into the car, Antonio stopped her. Alessandra, I know we're still getting to know each other again, but I want you to know that I've never felt so sure about anything in my life, and I've never felt so scared and hopeful at the same time. He held her hand for a moment. Let's take it slow. Let's take it slow. 6 months later, in a small, intimate ceremony in a church in downtown Madrid, Alessandra and Antonio renewed their wedding vows, this time not as two impulsive young people, but as two adults who deliberately chose to build a life together. In the front row, Elena cried with emotion. In the second row were some employees from the company, including former director Martinez, who now worked for Antonio after his old company went bankrupt. When the priest asked if they accepted each other as husband and wife, Alessandra looked into Antonio's eyes and saw not only the successful man he had become, but also traces of the young dreamer she had met in Barcelona. I do, she said, and this time she knew exactly what those words meant. Sometimes starting over isn't going back to the beginning, it's just choosing a new path. If you like this story, subscribe to hear the next ones.